Welcome to today's webinar, Bridging the Gap to Electric, presented by Roush Cleantech. I'm Lauren Fletcher, editor of Fleet, Trucking, and Transportation at Bobbitt, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we don't get to yours, don't worry. You will be contacted by email with a response after the event. I'm joined by our speaker today, Todd Mao, Executive Vice President of Roush Cleantech. Todd, thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor, Lauren. Thanks for having me. Let's dive right into the content.
Yeah, I'm going to let you go ahead, tell a little bit about yourself, and dive right on in.
Perfect. Yeah, before we hit the slides, again, it's an honor to be here. Appreciate you making the time. And I think the audience, there are a lot of questions around how do I get from where I am today to a fully electrified, zero carbon future. So I think we'll got a lot of great content to share with the audience and hopefully let their heads sleep on that pill a little bit easier as we move forward. So
awesome. Let's go for it.
Let's do it. Give us 1 second, folks. Thanks.
Slides up. You should be good to go.
Perfect. I'm not seeing on this side, Lauren, but that's okay. I can wing it. I'm still not seeing it, but I click on the slide tab. Sorry. There we go. See, you guys helped me all the way through. Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate it. So again, welcome. Appreciate everybody's time and attention today. And again, hopefully we'll make this interactive towards the end. I know we've already seen quite a few questions come in pre-event, as well as a couple that have already come in since we started. So again, Todd Mao, EVP, Sales, Marketing, and Service here at Roush. I've been with the company for 16 years, and it's an honor to come to work every day working for Jack. And we'll talk more about the company, and then we'll dive more into details on how we can help you in this journey to zero emission. So Roush, almost 50 years. It's hard to believe that Jack's been doing this for this long. Based here in Michigan, but we've got test and development facilities all over North America and some international as well. Really heavily invested in the engineering side and mostly based here in southeastern Michigan. Click, please. So you've probably heard of Roush. You might not have heard of Roush Cleantech before, but the enterprise is comprised of 4 different divisions. I'll start at the top. Roush Industries really is the technical arm of the organization that's been working for OEMs like Ford, GM, Chrysler, Stellantis for decades. RFK Racing, obviously we just brought Brad into the program last year. Brad's now an owner of our race team with Jack and just celebrated his first win with Roush Fenway on Sunday, which was awesome. Roush Performance, that's the high horsepower stuff that we're making up for on the Cleantech side. So that's Mustangs and F-150s and F-250s. And now Roush Cleantech, which has been around since 2010 that we'll do a deeper dive on today. Click, please. So markets we serve, again, I think this is important for the audience in that obviously mobility and trucks and cars and vans are near and dear to our heart. But as a company, we serve many different vocations, many different industries, and really bring all the different key learnings from those different customers and applications and challenges to what we're talking about here today. So obviously mobility is important to us, defense, entertainment. Most people don't really connect us with people like Disney, but a lot of the theme park rides have Roush's DNA all over those, aerospace, and then other applications as well. Click, please. Roush's experience is funny. We get the question quite a bit. Well, we know Roush in racing, and we know Roush Mustangs and F-150s, but what do you guys know about alternative fuels? And really the background of the company is really vast. As I mentioned, Roush Industries is the technical arm of the organization that's been kind of engineers for hire for those almost 50 years now. So this gives you just a snapshot, a couple of the examples that we can talk about, but going back to the late 90s where we were involved with Ford on a EV prototype Ford Ranger that eventually morphed into a hybrid product that they launched. But as you can see, Roush has been involved with a lot of different applications, a lot of different startups and traditional OEMs, and all different energy types. So today we're going to talk more about propane, but this slide just serves one as the experience we have with all of them, so we understand the thorns and the roses that come with each. And then obviously we'll talk more about propane today and where we think that makes sense in the transportation landscape. Click, please. So obviously working for a guy that's got the racing pedigree that Jack does, he keeps score, and we do too. And so it's interesting. I think, again, this is not to brag about our experience, but I think maybe it's we've been doing this a long time. I know Chelsea and I on the marketing side since me 2009, but now with 50,000 units on the road, almost 2 billion miles and 3,500 fleets. So really the message here is that those folks that are interested in learning more about propane, is that you're not going to be the first one dipping your toe in the water. There's a lot of experience with your peers as well as with companies like Roush that can help you bridge that gap and make that transition from gas and diesel to something cleaner and more domestic. Again, we'll talk more about that today. Click, please. So obviously, a lot of the folks are on this call because of the concern and what they see coming at from an emission standpoint, regulatory standpoint. Obviously, it's applicable for gasoline and diesel, but really going to be tough for diesel. It's starting really in 2024 as the NOx regulations get tighter. 2027, you see those regulations get driven down even further on the NOx side. And then there's also greenhouse gas requirements. You've probably heard phase 3 greenhouse gas, which is a CO2 implication that's going to make it really tough for those that are running diesel. The cost and complexity of those engines, love Cummins, they make a great engine, but the cost and complexity of the after treatment is going to be really tough, especially in the vocations that we're talking about here, class 4 through 7, heavy idle. It's going to be tough from a TCO standpoint to see diesel survive. So again, we've got a solution for you that we'll talk more about today. Click, please. So the landscape, obviously, there's multiple options out there. We probably could add hydrogen fuel cell on here as well, but I figured I would add, and we would look at the ones that everybody's most familiar with, starting with diesel and gasoline, looking at propane, natural gas, and then electric. And again, that previous slide where I showed all of Roush's experience across all the different applications and energy sources, this is kind of what we've learned over the years and why we believe, and why Jack has invested a lot of his own money in our propane technology here at CleanTech, is because when you look at the things that you as fleets have to encounter, from ease of adoption, from energy independence, the emissions that we just talked about, fueling infrastructure, obviously it's got a pencil from a total cost of ownership standpoint, range and all the way down. We think that propane checks the boxes that gasoline does, but obviously offers a lot of benefits from total cost of ownership and an emissions perspective. So click, please. So we look at it really in 4 elements: cost, operation, resilience, and environmental. And we'll walk you through each of these just to give you a feel for how propane answers the bell for each. So we'll start with resilience. And this is obviously, we get the question quite a bit, as I showed in the previous slide, that we've got all these units on the road. What's that going to do to the fuel prices? More and more fleets adopt propane vehicles. The reality is that it won't even make a dent. As a country, we're almost the Saudi Arabia of natural gas in propane. And so as you see on the left, we produce about 30 billion gallons, that's a B, a year, and we export about 20 billion of those to countries that use it for transportation. So it's a little painful to say that there's other countries that are smarter than the United States that are using this great energy source for transportation when we could keep it here and use it in applications we'll talk more about today. Click, please. So again, resilience, obviously we talk about the cost side. When there's that much supply, we know that it's going to drive stability in the price. And then the industry, that Roush is not involved in this, but we've got a lot of questions about this, especially with fleets that have both EV and propane. We're talking about that bridge today. Is the industry's developed this off-grid fueling option that can fuel propane vehicles as well as charge electric vehicles completely off the grid. So if there's some sort of power issue or implementation of electric vehicle infrastructure is taking longer, you could actually deploy this and charge your electric vehicles and fuel your propane vehicles. So again, innovation coming at you from every direction. Click, please. And we'll go over to the environmental side, which we touched a little bit on before. So environmental benefits, propane does not pose any harm to groundwater, surface water, or soil. Obviously you guys cook with propane. Many of you do cook with propane. A lot of homes are heated by propane. You've seen forklifts in enclosed spaces. So just some of the highlights: NOx emissions reductions, hydrocarbons. Obviously it's got less carbon than gasoline and diesel, and almost 100% reduction in particulate matter. So from an environmental standpoint, really strong. And today, if you guys haven't seen it, we're talking about commercial vehicles, but more than 1.5 million kids a day go to and from school in a propane-powered school bus. So that's a testament to how clean it is for kids and their developing lungs. Click, please. So again, we're purveyors of all the different energy types at Roush. We believe in all of them. It's just, certain ones have certain spots that are a better fit. And so we get the question about, or you hear, or potentially somebody on your board or a sustainability officer in your company might say, well, it's not as clean as electric. And the reality is traditional propane in most cases is actually cleaner, and this is kind of a well-to-wheel view from the propane industry, than electric, based on how that energy, the electricity is being generated. And albeit, there's a lot of effort, a lot of money going into cleaning up our grid and making it more durable. But today, there's a lot of locations that by putting in an electric vehicle, you're actually dearer than you would be if you were running a propane vehicle from a well-to-wheel perspective. Again, we're purveyors of EV, but just want to make sure that all those people that hear the word zero emissions, there's a lot more to the tale than just that. Click, please. And so, as a propane industry, obviously you saw on the previous slide, carbon intensity of 79. Our goal is to be here for a long time. When we talked about that supply of 20 billion gallons that are really untapped per year, the emergence of renewable propane is significant. And so as a fleet, if you adopt propane today and someone asks, well, what's the transition? What's our opportunity to get to lower emissions, lower carbon intensity? The growth of renewable propane as a supply source for you is significant and growing. And so I think that's the message, is that obviously it's based in a lot of states that have low carbon fuel standard credits like California. But as more and more states adopt those, you'll see more deployment of renewable propane in fleets across North America. Click, please. So let's go into operation, which is near and dear to a lot of the hearts of the folks on the phone. So obviously, as I mentioned before, Brad Keselowski just won his first race. Jack has always said, when that checkered flag drops, you're either going or you're not, and you better be prepared. And so we understand that as a company, that the technology we deploy in your vehicles has to be ready and capable of delivering and making sure you can get goods and people to the spot that needs to get. And so I think a testament to that is Jack's daughter has been running propane in her drag car for quite some time. And she and her race partner, the Bowles family, have won 8 championships, leveraging virtually the same engine technology and the same fuel that we put in commercial vehicles and school buses, and have been doing so over the last 15 years. Click, please. So scale, again, there's a lot of different technologies out there, and a lot of startups. And I think that the challenge with that, as exciting as a startup can be, also the concern is what happens down the road where scale, support, future innovation, service parts, and those questions start to arise. And again, I think we've been successful because we've been partnered with Ford for so long. So everything we're going to talk about today is based on a Ford powertrain. And that's the case because we've been connected with Ford for almost 50 years. And have access to their calibration and controls so that we can take a gasoline vehicle and update it to propane and have it perform seamlessly. And so with that benefit comes the scale of all the 7.3 production that goes into all these different vocational applications. And so 5, 10, 15 years down the road, a lot of the parts that you'll need, whether it's from Roush CleanTech or from Ford or aftermarket third-party organizations, because of the scale of that engine and 1,000 being produced today, the parts will be plentiful, and so that won't be a concern with some of the other emerging technologies that are in the marketplace today. Click, please. So engine stats, obviously, we were heavily involved with this old 6.8 engine that sunsetted in late 19, early 2020, both the 2-valve and 3-valve. And we were really excited about this ground-up V8 that's now been in production with Ford for almost 4 years. So more power, more performance, reduced emissions. And it's interesting, the spot at the lower right, propane has 108 octane, so the compression ratio of this engine is greater than it was on the 6.8, so we can take better advantage of that octane rating in propane to deliver more performance and better fuel economy for our fleet partners. Click, please. Let's go into something that's really important to those on the audience, which is cost, because we can have all these other things, but if it doesn't pencil and it requires a ton of outside subsidy, the thing just doesn't take off the way it does, and is not scalable for your operation. So click, please. So key inputs, and obviously there's a lot of companies, and you folks probably have your own mechanism for measuring financial capability or total cost of ownership or return on investment. Obviously fuel prices, annual miles, years planned, purchase price, grants that are available. And that, again, one of the things we'll hammer home today is that, grants are important. They're not necessary to run propane vehicles. So there are some subsidies that are out there today, but the thing pencils without any subsidy and provides a significant return on investment, which we'll walk through here in a second. I think the other piece too is that what we're going to show you is a static slide. All the inputs can be customized. So I think a call to action for the group is to reach out to us at Roush, and we can walk you through what your total cost of ownership would be with your own numbers for all the different variables we'll walk through here in a second. Click, please. Eye chart, and I'm not going to kill you with all this, right? Again, as I mentioned, that ultimately we can modify any of the inputs here from annual miles to how long you operate the vehicle. I think the key piece, though, is ultimately the incremental cost for propane. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you see propane, then you see propane with grants, you see gasoline, and you see diesel, and you see cost per mile operation. And so when you look at a comparable lifetime, let's just say 25,000 miles a year for 8 years, 200,000 miles, you'll notice that propane has a lower MPG than gasoline and diesel, lower energy content. So you're going to burn a little bit more propane to go the same mile or get the same job done. But ultimately, even by burning more propane because of the energy content difference, you go to the bottom line, the reduction in cost per mile to operate, really significant versus gas and diesel. And then today there's a subsidy that's been around since 2006, 2007 for every gallon of propane you dispense into your vehicles, which is 36 cents per gallon. So that's that second column that says with rebates that drops it down to 65 cents a mile for operation. The middle section on preventative maintenance, I didn't go attack that at all. Gasoline and propane should be comparable on preventative maintenance. I also didn't weight anything down with diesel. This is just common maintenance on diesel, so we're not taking into account any issues with after treatment or turbos or anything that we know a lot of fleets are struggling with from a cost perspective. So I think if anything, this is really conservative on what you'd see from a savings standpoint in transitioning from what you know to a propane fleet. Click, please. As I referenced that alt fuel tax credit, and there's the beauty of propane, we'll talk more about infrastructure here in a second, is there are about 3,000 propane companies out there that would love to put infrastructure in for you at your place of business. And if you can't fit it in at your business, there are a lot of locations around the country that you can get it on a retail basis. Although that won't be as beneficial from a financial perspective. Most of our fleet partners that I reference have fuel inside their gate, private fuel stations where they can take advantage of the lower fuel price as well as all the different subsidies that come with it. But again, I touched on the per gallon rebate of 36 cents. And then infrastructure, again, most of the propane companies are willing to put that infrastructure in for little to no cost. Typically, like here at Roush, Ferrogas put our station in, we had about $4,000 to run electric and put crash bollards in. In that case, we had the opportunity to go apply for that infrastructure grant, 30% of the cost up to $30,000 per location. Click, please. Go one more. So getting into the product, as I mentioned, we're connected to Ford. We do get the question from time to time, how about why not something else, Roush? And really the key, the secret ingredient is that access to the calibration and controls that we've had. Where we can take a gasoline vehicle, modify the calibration tables, and have that vehicle run efficiently without any performance loss on propane. And so everything we're going to, again, talk about today is Ford-based. So again, when we started at Roush, we started with light duty, and we quickly realized that probably the pain point for you fleets is on the heavier duty vehicles, class 4 through 7, where you burn more fuel. And so we transitioned back in 2012 out of the light duty to more class 4 through 7. So everything you see, we'll talk about that today. But purpose-built engine, as I referenced from Ford, with gas prep package to make up for or account for the different lubricity in propane versus gasoline. There are OEM ordering options, ship through here to Roush, as well as drop ship to other locations. So your traditional path of ordering a vehicle through a fleet management company or a dealer, they could drop it to Roush here, or they could drop it to a third-party location, then come to Roush once the body's on. But really the impact on order to delivery time is nominal. Ford factory warranties in place. We get this question a lot about what about performance? As I referenced back, Jack's daughter runs a derivative of our fuel system on her drag car, and she runs about almost 900 horsepower with propane. So no loss in horsepower, torque, or towing. If we wanted to do wheel stands with commercial trucks, we probably could, because it's a great performance fuel with 108 octane. And then diagnostics, again, we're tied in with Ford, so all the normal diagnostic tools and codes work, and then our technicians and our customer success team come in and train your technicians or whoever you outsource that to make sure they can safely operate on these vehicles. Click, please. So we'll start with Class 6, 7, obviously built by Ford and OHAP. We've got multiple different tank configurations that are available depending on what the application is that you offer and if you need clean cab to axle. So anywhere from 50 up to 74 usable gallons of fuel. We've got quite a few, and I'll show you in a second, complex drop frame applications that are running that can offer customers 200 to 300 miles of range. So again, the beauty of propane, because it's liquid and portable and low pressure, is we can pack a lot of fuel on board without impacting payload and give you comparable range to gasoline and diesel. I reference also, if you look below, we're certified at 0.02 grams NOx. So all the future standards that are coming, they're going to get tighter and tighter on NOx. I referenced in 2027, 0.035 grams of NOx will be the standard. The fact that we can already meet and showcase that we're capable of meeting those future NOx regulations show that there's a long pathway for propane in the transportation landscape. Click, please. So E450 cutaway and strip chassis, obviously used in a lot of transit applications as well as box trucks. We've got a lot of these running around the country, probably to the tune of 4,000 to 5,000 of these units running across fleets all across North America. We do offer, and again, support all different wheelbases from 158 on up to 208. Two different tank capacity offerings. One's 41 usable gallons, one's 64. Just depends on the application, the overhang, and how much range you need. So again, our team can accommodate and support from that. Click, please. And then finally, step van and motorhome chassis, F53, F59. Again, that same 7.3 liter V8. So the beauty of this is that same power plant that's in all these different vehicles. So from a parts commonality standpoint, on the base Ford side as well as the Roush side, there are a lot of commonality there. So it's easy to find parts and support for the 5, 10, 15, 20 years that you'd run these assets in your fleet. So whether it's a step van or a trolley, we offer multiple different tank configurations and accommodate all the way up to 26,000 pounds GVW. And then range, again, will vary a little bit based on your tank configuration. And again, we work with all the different body outfitters like Morgan Olson, Hometown Trolley, Utilimaster, you name it. We're well-versed on their operations and how propane nests into that and how we support your go-to-market strategy. Click, please. So deployments, it's interesting. We get the question all the time, is it just in a handful of states? Is it just Texas or California where there's subsidy? And I think this map really shows, and again, these green dots, it could be a deployment of 1, it could be a deployment of 100, showcase that this is really why we like propane a lot, and we believe in the scalability of it as a company. From a technical perspective, as I mentioned, infrastructure is easy. I can pack a lot of fuel on board. Same horsepower and torque. Range is not impacted. Payload's not impacted. So I think that's the reason you see more and more fleets adopting propane, both on the commercial side as well as the school bus side, because of all those pros that I just referenced. Click, please. So infrastructure, and I know we deal with a lot of fleets that are deploying propane vehicles as well as the electric vehicles, and we hear the struggle there, right? And is the technology on the vehicles is really advancing and being innovated. I think the piece that's struggling the most is the infrastructure and the utilities and the time to actually get infrastructure put in place. And so the beauty of propane is those headaches go away, and we'll walk you through that here. Click, please. So as I referenced before, this is an example. This is a bakery out of Chicago, Alpha Baking. Low to no cost infrastructure, very scalable and efficient, a handful of parking spaces. If you want to put it underground, you can, as I referenced before. Propane's not a ground contaminant. And so if you want to start with 3 or 4 or 5 vehicles in your fleet, and you start with a 500 or 1,000 gallon tank, or you morph up to some of our bigger fleets that have 30,000 gallon tanks on site to fuel a lot of vehicles, the beauty of it is very scalable. And so the propane companies are very willing to come help you put this infrastructure in, again, for little to no cost in exchange for a fuel contract, and it can scale as your fleet grows or moves from location to location as well. Click, please. So successes, I'm not going to bore you with thousands of them because we don't have that much time. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. But if you click, we've got quite a few, and probably you guys have seen brands run around your neighborhood and that are running propane. You won't notice, and again, that's the beauty of it. It's remarkably unremarkable. Other than the little black diamond on the back that denotes the vehicle runs on propane, power, performance, starting procedure, how comfortable the drivers are operating it, very seamless in that transition from gasoline to propane. And so I think that's why you've seen mass adoption across some of these fleets that are pictured here on the screen. Click. A handful of others. Again, I think the other piece is just the wide variety of applications that propane can serve, from straight box trucks to buses to really complex drop frames and everywhere in between. Again, because I can pack a lot of fuel, and just not to hammer that home, I can pack a lot of fuel on board and give you plenty of range without impacting where you put your body upfit or how you guys do your business every day. So again, I think that's another key reason why propane continues to grow in its success here in the United States. A couple more examples, Blue Triton. So again, that's one of those complex applications, drop frame application. That's a Mickey truck body on there. they're running well over 1,000 trucks all over North America. So again, you think about performance, nothing's heavier or more dense than water. And so they're full 33,000 pound trucks, a lot of them. They're leaving their leaving their depots and dropping water off with their customers each and every day. And so they've been doing that for almost 10 years. So again, I think it speaks to the success and longevity, not only from an emission standpoint, but also they're saving money along the way so that they can reinvest those in other environmental actions within the organization. Click, please. Another example, this is a postal carrier. Actually, a cool case study. These folks came to us and said, we're running 100,000 miles a year running these bulk trucks, and they're running a combination of gas and diesel. And so they couldn't find an alternative fuel that would give them that kind of range until we came into the picture. And so ultimately, these mail carriers, this is Nicholas as an example, but there are quite a few other contractors around the country that have adopted propane, and they're using our 74-gallon configuration that offers, in this application, almost 500 miles of range. So plenty of range, no impact to payload, and really seamless in their operation. It allows them to tout the green benefits as well as the cost-saving benefits for their fleet. Click. Another Absopure, again, not to hammer home water, but you think about these companies that sometimes get attacked unfairly for what their job is and their business is when they're delivering water in bottles, right? So the environmental folks say plastic water bottles aren't the greatest. That's their business. And so this is another mechanism for companies like Absopure to make that positive impact on the environment while not breaking the bank. And so they're running propane across multiple locations in their fleet. And another one, Canada Dry. Click, please. So service and support, this is a really important one, and I probably didn't do it justice with the number of slides I included, but at Roush, we've invested millions of dollars in people and process and tools to help make that transition from diesel and gasoline, which your technicians know, to something cleaner and more domestic and lower cost than propane. And so if you click, please, Chels. So kind of in a mini OEM style. So we've got our own contact center that manages warranty, tech support, tech publications. We've got a team of field service engineers that are based out in the field that work with our customers, with their repair centers, with the dealers, with the technicians themselves. So if for some reason our tech support line can't help you solve the problem, our field service engineers come on site and help you solve those problems. Training, service parts, CRM systems, technical publications. Again, heavy investment we've made in this because as good as we believe propane is, we know that these assets have to keep running. Everything's mechanical, so your technicians have to be comfortable in working on these vehicles and keeping them running for those cost savings and those emissions reductions to happen. So huge investment in this, and we do multiple trainings here at our corporate headquarters where we bring technicians in. Matter of fact, next week we've got some technicians coming in for factory tech training. We do on-site training, and then there's free web-based training as well for any technicians. So if anybody's interested in peeling back the layers of the onion a little bit, learning more about what propane is and how it affects their vehicle, reach out to us and we could set you up with access to look through those materials. And I think I'll help make that transition easier and more comfortable for your mechanics and technicians. So we're 30 minutes in, and I want to leave some time for questions. We get the question all the time. Matter of fact, I think the webinar, A Bridge to EV, we believe it's going to take them all. I know as much as we hear that it's going to be a fully electrified future, the reality is, as a country, why not leverage a lot of the resources that we have here? And propane's a great one. So we believe if it is a bridge, it's a really, really long bridge. Matter of fact, I probably have my arm twisted into saying it's a destination. When you've got the ample supply that I referenced, it's value priced. We showed you the pathway to near zero. Obviously, even with traditional propane, it's a significant emissions reduction, NOx and particulate matter and CO2. And then you look at renewable propane, and we at Roush are even messing with the industry. Things like DME, renewable DME, take our carbon intensity below zero. So I think the message there, it gives the pathway to your folks to say, if we adopt it today, do we have a chance to reduce our emissions long term? And the answer is absolutely you do. I touched on easy infrastructure, safety, built-in resiliency, and then just the no compromise on performance or range or payload, which I think is critical, because the last thing you want to do is go buy an asset where you've actually got to buy two to do the same job that one did. So when you think about the cost, the environmental impact of that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So we really believe that propane is a great common sense solution, and look forward to answering some questions here today.
Todd, thank you so much. That was incredibly informative. As you noted, we do have some time remaining, so we are going to ask a few of those questions that came in during the presentation. If you haven't dropped your question in and we're just super into everything he was saying, now's your chance. We'll go ahead and answer everything we can. So digging into one of the first ones that I see there, and I love this question, especially since you had that one chart that really showed how it was checking all the boxes. Why hasn't propane become more popular in transportation?
It's a great question. We kind of wonder that ourselves, to be honest with you. Sometimes Chelsea, who's our director of marketing, we think, boy, are we doing a bad job or what? But, I think it's a little bit our society. It's a little bit of the shiny penny syndrome, right? If you think back to 2011, 2012, 2013, everything was going to be natural gas. And we love natural gas. Matter of fact, we developed a natural gas bus with Bluebird. And now everything's going to be electrified, right? So it feels like the pendulum driven by government is let's just pick a winner. And so, unfortunately, I think as an industry, propane industry, we don't do a good enough job on singing the benefits of the energy. And I think some of it, too, was up until a few years ago, we didn't have the access to the supply of renewable propane. So when someone asked that environmental question, we talk about cost savings, but we really couldn't show a pathway to near zero. And so now we can. It is a matter of fact, all the production of sustainable aviation fuel, one of the byproducts is renewable propane. So more and more supply will come. And so I think with that, and I think we're seeing it now, again, we love full electric vehicles. We tried to do one at Roush, just wasn't ready for prime time. I think as more and more fleets say, these are the applications where EV works, but it doesn't work in these applications, where else do I go? And so I showed a couple complex ones like that drop frame application, really tough to do, something electrified on that chassis and not significantly impact payload and range. And so, again, I think propane is going to have a play in this transportation discussion for a long time to come.
I think that leads really well into the next question that we've got. You shared a lot about propane's environmental benefits. And I think, we all know that regulations have not been relaxing. They just keep getting a lot more stringent. Will propane be viable as emissions requirements continue to get even more stringent over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we've thought a lot of that ourselves, as we continue to make more investment into the 7.3 engine. And ultimately, I think we start with a great base engine that Ford produces in the 7.3 V8 that I talked about. I do think that, when I showed on a previous slide that we're already certified at 0.02 grams NOx today. So we're already out ahead of the curve, showcasing our capability with our technology and the fuel to meet future requirements. Ultimately, there'll be more changes likely to the engine that will cause us to have to go back in and make more changes. But ultimately, the fact that we can showcase that 4 or 5 years in advance, that we can meet those requirements, I think sends a good message. And it should be a comfort to the fleets that, for the next 7, 8, 10, 12 years, that this is going to be an energy that will stand the test of time. Anybody who says I can predict past 2035, I'd like to talk to you, because I think we're all guessing at that point, right? I know everybody says, hey, we're going to be fully electrified by that point, but the investment required as a country to get there is not going to happen that fast. And so therefore, we're going to have something that's going to stand in its place and support that transition and those innovations that will have to come. And I think propane is going to be one of those lead children to help that transition for sure.
You talked a lot about the multiple options and different types of vehicles that this works for. One of our audience members has asked if you have any plans to move into the semi or auto hauler category.
Yeah, that's a great question. At Roush, so we're connected to Ford on the V8 engine. So, ultimately, I think if there was a engine provider that had more power and more torque for those heavier, bigger applications, propane would play very well there because all the reasons I mentioned, the ease of infrastructure, power and performance. Obviously, on a bigger truck, we've got more real estate to pack more fuel. So it's something we've thought long and hard about. Unfortunately, we'd love to convince Cummins to do a 15-liter propane engine because we think that would have a lot of play in the market. But ultimately, I think that's really the reason why you see us kind of in class 4 through 7 is just, one, there's a lot of market to go tackle. There's a lot of fleets that have a challenge that we can go help with. But also, it's just finding that next powertrain that would take us, beyond the current weight classes that we're at.
Makes a lot of sense. Another one that we've got in, and keep sending, these are absolutely fantastic questions we're getting. Can a fleet realize a significant reduction in CO2 emissions simply by increasing the percentage of propane-powered chassis and not changing driving behaviors or reducing idle time?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so ultimately, CO2 improvement, as I mentioned, lower carbon in propane. So there are benefits that would come with that. I would say that if your focus is on CO2, that likely we've got a couple of national fleets that are already driving renewable propane through a lot of their operations. So that would be a significant reduction in carbon intensity by moving to propane and renewable propane. So the answer is yes, both on the CO2 as well as the NOx side and particulate matter, as I referenced before. Obviously the idle thing, is a challenge for everybody. I think that if we could have multiple technologies in play that reduce idle for drivers, and as well as implement things like renewable propane, I think that kills two birds with one stone. But from a technical perspective, there's no reason you're not going to impact the engine or the technology like you do with diesel. I know that's a challenge we get. If you don't go into regen mode, there's no regen mode for propane. So if you wanted to sit there and idle the thing all day long, and you were allowing your drivers or operators to do that, you're not going to impact the technology, and you are going to reduce emissions by doing that.
So you mentioned earlier kind of the focus on that class 4 to 7 medium duty space. I've got two questions that came in that I'm going to combine and throw over at you. Are there any plans on deploying a class 8 truck segment for you guys? And when it comes to emissions devices, what might class 8 propane trucks still require?
That's a great question. Nothing in our current product development plans for Class 8, as I referenced, we're somewhat limited just based on available powertrains that we could integrate our technology into. We do believe there's a great market for it, although I think longer term, to be honest with you, that's probably where hydrogen fuel cell will make a lot of sense. Fully electrified Class 8 trucks, especially long haul, seems like a challenge to me, charging and payload impact by packing enough batteries on board. But I think, that's something for us. It's finding that niche where each energy makes sense. And so, while I do think from a physical standpoint, performance standpoint, propane would make a lot of sense. I think that market longer term, total cost of ownership, you probably would see hydrogen fuel cell succeed there longer term than you would propane. So before we make that kind of significant investment, I know talking to Jack would say, have you talked to all the fleets that run 4 through 7 vehicles first? And the answer is no. Like to your question earlier, why aren't more people running propane? I think we've got to go make sure the message is heard within the segment where it makes the most sense and it's easily adopted right now. And that's really in 4 through 7.
Love it. From a maintenance side, what kinds of changes would be necessary for a repair shop to service these vehicles versus something like CNG?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, everywhere the exploration where we're finding natural gas, propane is one of the liquids that comes with that, right? So sometimes people think it's common from a pressure standpoint or, impact to garage operations. The reality is, propane on an average day is a couple hundred pounds of pressure, 250 pounds of pressure versus CNG is 3,600 pounds. Propane's heavier than air. So typically if your shop is set up for gasoline and diesel, there are no changes that need to get made to your shop. Obviously, we always say refer to your local fire marshal, and we can assist in that process with the propane companies. But natural gas lighter than air, so it's going to go towards the ceiling. So that's where you hear about significant investment in explosion-proof lighting and things like that. With propane, you don't have that. Again, a typical garage is set up to and authorized to work on gasoline and diesel vehicles. Then propane would plug right in there, no problem at all.
This next question that I see, I know I've heard this a lot when talking with different fleets about fuel types and options and why they're using what they're using. Question is, I ran propane trucks back in the 80s and 90s, and the performance and cold startability was a challenge. So what's different now?
Yeah, I guess great question. And it's amazing after 15, 16 years of doing this, we still get that question. Just think about our lives, think about the iPhone and where we started, right? Technology evolves, technology improves, but ultimately the difference between, I'll say, propane of yesteryear, you had what we call vapor carbureted propane technology. Ours is direct liquid injection into the engine, so we keep it under low pressure all the way through the intake. And so our technology actually thrives in the cold. Matter of fact, we've got trucks and buses that are running up in northern Canada at temperatures that are 40, 50 below zero. So that piece of it, with the adoption of the liquid injected propane technology that we use in our vehicles, really solves that problem in cold performance. Don't have that challenge anymore. And then it also provides the performance that we talked about before. So propane being 108 octane, when you combine with our technology, if we wanted to significantly boost horsepower and torque, we could, but then obviously we impact all the great work that Ford does on the durability of the engine for gasoline. So, and ultimately fleets aren't looking for that anyway. They're not looking to do wheel stands like Susan Roush does in her Mustang. And so the performance of the fuel of the vehicle is there. The cold startability of it is gone. And if anybody has question on that, we've got a Rolodex of hundreds of fleets that would tell you how good the operation's been in some really cold climates over the last decade plus.
So this one is another pretty big concern that I think you're going to have from a lot of these fleets. I'm struggling with EV adoption due to a significant loss of payload. Will I see that same challenge with propane?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's matter of fact, a few years ago, Roush was working on an electrified Class 6-7 chassis, and obviously the investment, the market just wasn't ready for that from our perspective. But one of the challenges was just the impact of payload and range. And so, when you're talking about available payload getting, cut by 2 or 3, 4,000 pounds, again, it goes back to my comment. If now I have to have 2 trucks to do the same job, what kind of impact am I making on the environment having 2 trucks do the same job? And then from a cost perspective, it just doesn't box for your CFO. And so propane, the tanks are steel, so that the tanks actually weigh more than the gasoline tanks that come off the vehicle, but the propane itself weighs less than gasoline does. So the payload impact, depending on the application, probably on our dual tank F650, F750, that gives you 74 usable gallons, you're talking, 200-300 pounds max, fully loaded of impact to your payload. So it's nominal, which is again why a lot of fleets are adopting the medium duty application.
And the next one we've got that came in. So I'm aware of the F650, F750 opportunities. Are there additional OEM with compatible chassis, or that will have compatible chassis for propane conversions?
Yeah, great question. And we're a believer that competition's great. Rising tide lifts all ships. Right now, there are no other OEM options for propane. At one point, obviously, public knowledge now, Cummins was working on a fuel agnostic engine where propane was one of those options, the 6.7 liter engine. Whether that sees light of day, I can't answer. That's Cummins to answer. I think the reality is we're connected to Ford. We're going to stick with Ford. We've got access to Ford controls, and there's tens of thousands of vehicles and fleets per year that are buying gas and diesel that we could convince that propane's the right transition. So for now, I think we'll stick with the Ford option. And then again, longer term, would we diversify outside of Ford? Potentially. Or are there other engine applications coming from other providers? Potentially, right? That's a question to somebody like Cummins. I do think it's challenging when you think about OEMs. I don't envy the position they're in. All the investment dollars going in to develop the fully electrified products doesn't leave much of the piggy bank for other stuff, right? And so even if somebody does want to develop another option, when you got tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars going into EV development, hydrogen fuel cell development, doesn't leave much left over to go after something like propane. So for now, we're the purveyors of it in the Ford chassis, and we like the position, but the water's warm and we welcome the competition. So there was a note that you had made earlier. We had a question that asked about propane and how it would impact not worrying about idling and if our drivers weren't doing that. But are there concerns over extended idling with propane? No, it shouldn't be. There's no concern. I mean, again, you're just going to consume, because of the energy content of propane, you're going to consume more fuel in that idle than you would with gasoline. Obviously, you're still going to reduce emissions, but you're going to burn more fuel. So ultimately, if it's one for one, it's not going to do any damage to the engine, not going to do any damage to our fuel system, but you're not going to see the benefit that you would by cutting idle. And that's the same case with gas and diesel and other technologies, right? The less idle you can do, less fuel you burn, the better you're going to be in regards to maintenance and fuel cost savings. But there's nothing unique to propane that excessive idling would drive. If anything, propane, it's like a cooling shot that vaporizes at negative 44 Fahrenheit. So it's not driving more heat into the engine, any of those things that maybe people have heard in yesteryear with different technology. So again, I think being purveyors of the environment, less idle is good. So if we can help you do that in some other ways, and we've helped fleets integrate anti-idle technology in with our propane upfit when we've done that too. So however we can help that, we remain here to do that for you guys.
You've touched on this one a little bit, especially with Jack's daughter and her experiences. But is there anything else you want to add related to if performance is affected by a propane conversion?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it back up, just because, again, we get that question. The performance is not impacted, especially 7.3 V8 now. I mentioned the compression ratio is increased, so we can really take advantage of the octane rating of the fuel. Again, we calibrate the engine to have the same horsepower and torque as the base gasoline engine. If we wanted to make more performance, more torque out of that engine, we could. But again, a lot of dollars are spent by Ford on the durability of the engine transmission, so we're not going to do anything to that. And as well as the more power performance you put in, that's just going to drive down fuel economy, reduces total cost of ownership, more emissions unnecessarily. So, but I can tell you, if anybody's concerned about performance, we've got, again, a Rolodex of fleets that would talk to you about the performance of propane in a wide variety of applications, and there should be no concern there.
We have another one that just dropped in from our audience. Keep them coming, guys. What would the impacts of using propane in service intervals versus a liquid fuel?
Yeah, so you could look at a gasoline-powered F650, 750 as an example, or an E450 or an F53, 59. Service intervals remain the same. There's a couple of unique parts on our system filters for fuel that get changed at intervals that are comparable to gasoline. But there's nothing unique that would require you to change your maintenance habits versus a gasoline vehicle. Again, that's one of the reasons we really like propane. And when people ask us, what are the benefits from a maintenance standpoint, we typically just say against gasoline, it's the same as. Obviously, diesel, we think there's significant benefit in reduction in maintenance costs, quarts of oil and DEF and all the other stuff that goes into it, as well as, some of the higher cost, higher complexity items that come with diesel after treatment systems. But shouldn't be any difference. And if anything, we say same as. Again, we like to be conservative at Roush, under promise, over deliver. Likely you'd see some benefit longer term. Again, burning less carbon. If you crack a propane engine at 100,000 miles and a gasoline engine, it's going to look like it just came off the plant floor compared to a gasoline version.
That's awesome. All right, this one came through. So what is the average CO2 emissions difference between a gas engine and a propane conversion?
Yeah, what I'll say is about 18% when you're using traditional propane versus gasoline. Again, when I reference renewable propane, the even greater reduction, carbon intensity, depending on the feed source of the propane and the renewable application, we could get a carbon intensity down to, say, 20. So it just depends. But traditional propane, which is what most fleets are running, if your sustainability officer is asking you the question, I would just say 15 to 20% with traditional propane, and significantly greater once the transition to renewable propane happens.
And as we've had this conversation, I've loved how absolutely real you've been and honest. One of the questions that has come through is, so what's the downside to a propane conversion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the one thing working for Jack is that eyes wide open, and we prefer to be the guys and gals that tell you the truth. And there's a lot of good that comes with it. And really the challenge is it's new. Right? Even after all the years we've been doing this, is that you still got to convince all your stakeholders, your technicians, your drivers, your landlords, if you don't own the property, to put infrastructure in. So, in today's environment where there's less people and more burden on those people, to say you've got to make that transition, put infrastructure in, and go figure out how to train your drivers and do something new, I think human nature is just resistant to that. But if you take the human nature part of it out of it, the downside, when you look at it, we've got enough fleets that have run it. The technology is good. The fuel is plentiful. The cost of it's really value priced. I hate to ever use the word cheap, but it's compared to everything else, it's stable and much lower cost, will continue to stay there. So ultimately the traditional fuels are really going to get attacked with these new regulatory standards where, again, they apply to propane as well, but because of the lower carbon content of propane, we stand in a really better position to meet those future requirements. And so whatever benefits you have today of traditional fuels, it's going to get more and more complex and costly. And so I think, not fortunate or unfortunate, you're going to get forced to find something else. And so where you've sat for the last 10, 20, 30 years with traditional fuels, you're going to have to look for something else. And this is really your safe spot until the other technology emerges and matures and infrastructure is there. And again, whether that's pure electric or hydrogen fuel cell or you name it, this is a great spot for the next significant amount of time.
And this one I think was a real important one. So once something's been converted, but can the chassis be converted back to gas from that propane conversion?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've had fleets that, are leasing, through somebody, and they say, hey, we're going to keep it 7 years. If the market value of that asset in 7 years would be better on gasoline, could we convert it back? The answer is, if you keep the parts, there's no reason you couldn't convert the vehicle back to gasoline, reflash the calibration, the computer from propane to gasoline, and sell the asset. So absolutely, from a mechanical and software standpoint, it can be done. I just think, longer term, likely vehicles like this with still some life left on it will become even more valuable when the price and cost of traditional powertrains and fuels go up. You've got a propane powered vehicle that likely will get you more in the secondary market than a traditional powered vehicle would.
I love it. Well, that is the questions that we've had and the time that we've got for today. Thank you so much for everybody that sent through some questions. If you did ask a question that wasn't answered, we will be following up via email and make sure that we answer all your questions individually. We do hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. I really want to thank again Todd Mao and Roush Clean Tech for today's presentation. And I want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the Work Truck website at www.worktruckonline.com/webinars. Again, thank you so much, Todd.
I appreciate it. Our doors are open, so come visit anytime and we'll teach you more about why this makes sense. Thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Todd's info is up on the screen. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys.